The wind cut across the prairie like a dull blade, whipping dust into her eyes until they burned raw. Eliza trudged forward, her boots worn thin as paper, each step sinking into the cracked earth that stretched endless under a sky bleached white by the sun. Her arms ached from carrying the youngest little Mary, whose feverish cheek pressed hot against her shoulder. The other four trailed behind in a ragged line, Samuel pulling at his sister's hand, the twins whispering complaints that faded into the relentless hiss of grass bending low. They had walked for days or maybe weeks, time blurred in the heat and the hollow gnaw of hunger that clawed at her belly. The wagon had given out miles back, axle snapped clean under the weight of what little they owned, a few pots, a quilt patched from her wedding dress, the Bible her husband had carried from Kentucky. John. His name rose in her throat like bile, but she swallowed it down, focusing on the horizon where the land dipped into a shallow valley, promising nothing. The children whimpered now and then, but mostly they were silent, their small faces streaked with dirt and resignation. Eliza's dress hung loose on her frame, the fabric once blue now faded to the color of old bones. Sweat trickled down her spine, mixing with the grit that coated everything, turning her skin to sandpaper. She stopped for a moment, setting Mary down gently on a tuft of dry buffalo grass. The girl's breaths came shallow, her eyes half closed against the glare. Eliza knelt, dipping a rag into the last dregs of water from the canteen, pressing it to Mary's forehead. The water was warm, brackish, but it was all they had. Samuel, the eldest at 8, watched her with eyes too old for his years. "Mama, when we gonna stop?" he asked, his voice cracking like the earth beneath them. Soon, she lied, her own voice a rasp. The lie tasted like ash. There was no end to this vast indifference. The prairie didn't care for widows or orphans. It swallowed them whole bone. She thought of the homestead they'd left behind, the cabin John had built with his own hands, the soil they'd turned together in the first hopeful years. But drought had come, then fever taking him in the night, while she held his hand, whispering promises she couldn't keep. The bank had taken the rest, debts he hadn't told her about, papers signed in secret. Neighbors turned away, their pity thin as the wind. "Can't feed our own," they'd said, eyes averted. Eliza rose, hoisting Mary back into her arms. The weight pulled at her like gravity itself, but she moved on one foot before the other. Memories flickered like heat, mirages, John's laugh echoing in the barn, as he swung Samuel high the way he'd trace her collarbone, at night murmuring about the life they'd build. 5 children he'd wanted, and God had given them that, but taken him before the youngest could know his face. She blinked away the sting, not tears. There was no water left for that. The sun beat down merciless, turning the world to a haze of gold and brown. A lone hawk circled overhead, its shadow crossing their path like a fleeting mercy. Hours blurred into the ache. The children's steps slowed, dragging. Eliza's mind wandered to the letters from her sister in St. Louis, promising a fresh start. But the distance was a chasm, and the coins in her pocket wouldn't bridge it. She imagined the cool shade of trees, water running clear, but the prairie offered only thorns and thistles snagging at her skirt. A distant rumble stirred her thunder, no hooves. She squinted against the light heart, thudding dull in her chest. A rider emerged from the shimmer, a man on a bay horse, dust clouding. He reined in slow, his hat shadowing a face lined by sun and years. Eliza froze, hand instinctively reaching for the knife tucked in her belt, though her fingers trembled. The children clustered close, silent as stones. The stranger dismounted, boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his shirt stained with sweat, a rifle slung across his saddle. His eyes, sharp blue under the brim, swept over them, lingering on Mary's flushed face. "You lost," his voice was gravel, unused to softness. Eliza straightened, chin lifting despite the exhaustion. "Headed east, to kin." He nodded once, glancing at the empty horizon. "Ain't much east, but more of this." "Water." He unslung a canteen from his saddle, offering it without flourish. She hesitated, pride warring with need. The children's eyes fixed on it, pleading. She took it, nodding thanks, and passed it to Samuel first. The man watched, expression unreadable, then rummaged in his saddlebag, pulling out hardtack and jerky. "For the young uns," he said, handing it over. Eliza met his gaze, searching for motive, finding only the quiet weight of a man who'd seen his share of hard miles. "Obliged," she murmured. He mounted up again, tipping his hat. "Ranch a few miles north. If you need shelter." Then he was gone, horse kicking up dust that settled. They ate in silence, the food like manna in her mouth. Strength trickled back, faint but real. Eliza watched the direction he'd ridden, the prairie, swallowing him as it had everything else. But for the first time in days, the indifference cracked just a hair. As dusk fell, painting the sky in bruised purples, they turned north. The wind cooled, carrying the faint scent of sage. Mary's fever broke in the night, her small hand clutching Eliza's as they walked on. Enable notifications to stay updated with Romance Trails Wild West. The ranch appeared first as a low smudge against the northern, then sharpened into shape as they drew closer, a weathered clapboard house, smoke curling thin from a stone chimney, outbuildings scattered like forgotten thoughts. A windmill creaked lazily, pulling water into a wooden tank that glinted silver in the last light. Cattle moved slow in a distant pasture, their lowing carried on the breeze like a mournful hymn. Eliza halted at the fence line, the children pressing against her skirts. The stranger from the trail was there already, leaning on a post hat pushed back. He'd seen them coming, waited without hurry. Up close, he looked carved from the same hard country sun-creased skin, hands broad and scarred, a quiet steadiness in the way he stood. "Name's Caleb Harrow," he said, voice low. "You made it." "Eliza," she answered. Then, softer, "These are mine. Samuel, Ruth, the twins, Jacob and Hannah and Mary." He nodded to each in turn, grave, as if meeting grown folk. Mary stirred in Eliza's arms, eyes fluttering open. Caleb stepped forward slow, so as not to startle, and brushed a calloused thumb across the girl's damp forehead. "Fever's down. Good sign." Eliza felt the touch echo in her own chest, unexpected. She looked away toward the house. "We won't trouble you long. Just a night out of the wind." "Stay as you need," he said simply. "House is big. Empty." Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and coffee, of bread rising under a cloth. A single lamp burned on the table, throwing soft gold across plank floors, worn smooth by years of boots. Caleb set a kettle on the stove, moved with the economical grace of a man accustomed to doing for himself. He ladled stew into bowls, beef and potatoes thickened with barley, and passed them without ceremony. The children ate like starved things, silent at first, then murmuring small thanks between bites. Eliza watched him across the room. He ate standing back to the wall, eyes flicking to the door now and then as though habit demanded it. When the bowls were empty, he carried them to the basin sleeves, rolled to the elbow forearms, corded and brown. She rose to help. He shook his head, once gentle but firm. "Sit," he said. "You've carried enough today." She obeyed, too tired to argue, and felt the strange relief of being told what to do just once. Night settled thick. Caleb spread blankets on the floor near the hearth for the children, then showed Eliza to a small room at the back. A narrow bed, a quilt pieced in dark greens and browns, a window looking out on moonlit grass. She laid Mary down, smoothed the hair from her daughter's brow. The girl sighed, once deep and peaceful, already drifting. In the main room, Caleb sat by the fire, cleaning a rifle with slow, deliberate strokes. Eliza lingered in the doorway. "You live here alone?" she asked. "Since my mother passed. Father, before that." He kept his eyes on the gun. "Built the place together. Kept it." No wife. A pause, the cloth moving along the barrel. "Was long time back. She didn't take to the country. Went home to Ohio. Never came back." The words hung plain, unadorned. Eliza felt them settle in her like stones in a riverbed. She thought of John's grave behind the old cabin, the wooden cross already leaning the way the wind had scoured his name from the marker in 2 short seasons. "I'm sorry," she said. Caleb lifted one shoulder. "Wasn't meant, I reckon. Some folks aren't built for open land. Some are." He set the rifle aside, rose and banked the fire. "Sleep," he told her. "Tomorrow's work enough." She returned to the small room, closed the door soft. In the dark, she stood a long minute listening to the house breathe around her, the children's quiet snores, the wind brushing the eaves, the faint pop of embers dying. For the first time since John's fever broke, the silence did not feel like accusation. Morning came gray and cool. Caleb was already outside when she stepped onto the porch, splitting wood with steady swings that sent bright chips arcing into the light. The children spilled out behind her, blinking, then ran toward the barn where a gray mare nickered at the fence. Liza watched them, a small ache loosening in her chest. Caleb paused, axe resting on his shoulder. "Chickens need feeding. Cows need milking. You know the work some," she said. He handed her a pail. "Start there." She took it, fingers brushing his for the barest second. The metal was cold, his skin warm. Neither of them acknowledged it. The days began to stack themselves like cordwood. Eliza rose before first light, learned the rhythm of the place, the creak of the pump, handled the sweet, sour smell of the milking stall, the way the wind changed direction before noon. Her hands blistered, then toughened. The children grew brown and loud again, chasing each other through the yard, helping with small chores until their laughter rang against the house. Caleb spoke little, but he noticed everything: the way she favored her left ankle after a long walk, the way Samuel hung back when strangers rode near the way. Mary still woke, crying for her father. Some nights, he left extra blankets on her bed without comment, set a chair near the stove, when the evenings turned sharp, carved a small wooden horse for Jacob, and said nothing when the boy clutched it like treasure. One evening after supper, he sat on the porch steps, smoking a pipe while Eliza shelled peas into a bowl. The sky burned slow orange, then cooled to indigo. Crickets started up in the grass. "You ever think of going back?" he asked, smoke curling upward. "To Kentucky." She shook her head. "Nothing left there but ghosts." He nodded, tapped ash from the bowl. "Same here. Thought once I'd sell out, follow her east. Couldn't make myself leave the dirt my folks broke." She looked at him, then realized the lines around his eyes were not only from sun. Some were carved by waiting, by nights alone with the same questions turning over and over. "You still miss her?" she asked. "Miss what might been," he said. "Not who she was." The honesty lay between them, plain as the stars coming out. Eliza felt it settle, not heavy, but solid. She set the bowl aside. "I miss my husband every day, but I don't miss the pretending we were enough." Caleb met her eyes. Something flickered there, recognition maybe, or the first thin thread of hope. They sat in silence after that, the night folding gentle around them, the prairie stretching vast and dark beyond the lamp glow from the open door. The weeks turned into a quiet rhythm that felt almost like forgiveness. Eliza learned the ranch the way one learns a new language: slow repetition and small failures. She rose with the roosters, her hands finding the familiar shapes of work: the rough wooden handle of the milk pail, the brittle stems of dried corn she scattered for the hens, the iron latch on the barn door that stuck when the air turned damp. Her body complained at first, muscles knotted, palms split open anew, but the pain sharpened into purpose. Each dawn she stepped onto the porch and breathed deep-tasting sage and dust and the faint metallic promise of rain that never quite arrived. The children bloomed in the space Caleb gave them. Samuel took to following the older man like a shadow, learning to mend fence wire, to read the sky for weather, to hold a horse's hoof steady while Caleb pared it. Ruth helped with the garden patch behind the house, her small fingers pressing seeds into the dark soil Caleb had hauled in sacks from the river bottom years before. The twins raced through the yard barefoot and sun-browned, their laughter bouncing off the clapboard walls. Mary, still fragile, spent mornings on the porch steps, with a blanket across her lap, watching everything with wide, solemn eyes. Sometimes Caleb would sit beside her, whittling nothing in particular, letting her lean against his arm until she dozed. Eliza watched these moments from the kitchen window, a dishcloth forgotten in her hands. There was a gentleness in him she hadn't expected, careful, unshowy. He never raised his voice to the children, never demanded thanks. When Jacob came in with a scraped knee, Caleb knelt without a word, cleaned the cut with whiskey from a brown bottle, tied it with a strip of clean cloth torn from an old shirt. When Hannah woke, screaming from a nightmare about wolves, he carried her to the hearth, wrapped her in his own coat, and sat until her breathing steadied. He did these things as though they were ordinary, as though the house had always held this much quiet kindness. One afternoon, while the children napped in the shade of the cottonwood, Eliza found him in the barn loft, sorting through a trunk of yellowed papers and faded photographs. Dust motes drifted in the slanted light. He didn't startle when she climbed the ladder. He only glanced up, then returned to the open album on his knees. "My mother's," he said. "She kept everything." Eliza stepped closer. The photograph showed a younger Caleb, gangly, serious, standing beside a woman with his same steady eyes, and a man whose face was mostly beard and shadow. There were letters, too, tied with twine ink faded to brown. "She wanted me to read law, thought the country would swallow me whole if I stayed. My father laughed at that. Said the land don't swallow what belongs to it." He closed the album, fingers lingering on the worn leather cover. "I stayed anyway. Built what they started. Never regretted it till she left." Eliza sat on a hay bale across from him. The loft smelled of old straw and oiled leather. "And now it's just dirt and sky and what I make of it." He met her gaze. "Till you walked up out of the heat, with 5 kids and nothing between you and the grave but stubborn." She felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from shame, but from the plain weight of being seen. "I didn't choose stubborn. It chose me." "Same difference," he said. They were quiet a long minute. Outside, a horse stamped, impatient for grain. Caleb stood, offered her his hand. She took it, rough palm against rough palm, and let him pull her up. Neither let go right away. That evening, after the supper dishes were done, they walked out past the corrals to where the prairie fell away toward a shallow creek. The water ran thin over smooth stones, silver in the moonlight. Caleb stopped at the bank, hand. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what happens when winter comes. About the house. About you and the young uns." Eliza's heart kicked hard once, then steadied. "And I'd like you to, not out of pity. Not because the place is too big for one man." He turned to face her fully. "Because it feels right. Because when I look at you working this ground, I see someone who belongs here. And because when I look at your children, I see what this place could be again." The words landed soft like snow. Eliza felt them settle deep, stirring something she'd thought long buried. She looked at the creek, at the way moonlight shattered and reformed on the surface. "I'm afraid," she admitted, voice barely above the water's murmur. "Afraid of trusting again. Afraid of losing again." "I know," he said. "I'm afraid too. But fear's a poor reason to keep walking away from what might be good." She turned to him then. His face was half in shadow, half in silver light. She reached up slow and touched the line of his jaw, rough stubble, warm skin. He didn't move, only watched her with that same quiet steadiness. "I need time," she whispered. "You've got all you need," he answered. They stood there until the night grew colder, until the stars burned bright overhead. When they walked back to the house, their shoulders brushed, once accidental, then stayed close. Inside, the lamp still glowed. The children slept. The fire snapped soft in the grate. Eliza paused at her door hand on the frame. "Good night, Caleb." "Good night, Eliza." She closed the door, leaned against it, and let the first real tears come in months. Quiet cleansing, not born of grief, but of something opening, tentative and alive. The first cold front arrived without warning, sweeping down from the north like a judgment long deferred. One morning the air held summer's last warmth. By evening the wind carried ice in it. Eliza woke to frost, silvering the window panes, the children's breaths clouding white in the lamplight. She built the fire higher, wrapped them in every blanket the house owned, and still felt the chill settle into her bones. Caleb was already outside, breaking ice on the stock tanks, his breath steaming as he worked. She watched him from the porch coat collar turned up, hat pulled low. He moved steady, unhurried, as though cold were only another season to out. When he came in at noon, cheeks, red hands cracked raw, he carried a brace of rabbits slung over his shoulder. He skinned them at the table, while Eliza peeled potatoes, the children hovering close, fascinated and a little afraid of the quick, sure strokes of his knife. That night, the wind howled around the eaves, rattling the shutters. Mary crawled into Eliza's bed, shivering. Eliza held her close, listening to the house groan under the assault. Across the hall, Caleb's door stood ajar. She could see the faint glow of his lamp, hear the scratch of a pen on paper. Curiosity pulled her from the warmth. She slipped across the corridor in her stocking feet, knocked once soft. He looked up from the small desk spectacles perched on his nose, something she'd never seen before. The sight startled her, the hard lines of his face softened by lamplight and the thin wire. "Letters," he explained, setting the pen down. "To the county seat. About the school. Been closed 3 winters now. Thought maybe we could get a teacher out here again." Eliza stepped inside, arms crossed against the draft. "You write to them often every fall." He removed the spectacles, rubbed the bridge of his nose. "They write back polite. Say fun. Say maybe next year." She studied the neat rows of his handwriting, careful, deliberate, like everything else about him. "You never told me you could do that. Didn't seem worth mentioning." He folded the letter, sealed it with a drop of wax. "Some things you keep trying even when the answer stays no." The words hung between them. Eliza felt them brush against her own doubts, the ones that woke her in the small hours. Whether she could stay, whether she deserved this fragile peace, whether trusting again would only invite another loss. She moved closer, sat on the edge of his bed. "I've been thinking about what you said. About staying." He waited, patient as stone. "I'm scared," she said again, simpler this time. "Not just of the winters or the work, of waking up one day and finding you gone too. Or me failing these children the way I failed to keep their father alive." Caleb set the letter aside. He rose, crossed the room, and knelt before her, so their eyes were. "I can't promise I won't die someday. None of us can. But I can promise I won't leave you by choice. Not while there's breath in me." His hands rested light on her knees. She covered them with her own feeling, the calluses, the faint tremor that betrayed how much the words cost him. "I want to stay," she whispered. "With you. With all of this." He exhaled once, long and slow, as though he'd been holding the breath for years. Then he leaned forward and kissed her, gentle, careful, like a man afraid the moment might shatter. She kissed him back, tasting salt and wood smoke and something deeper, something like home. They pulled apart only when the lamp began to gutter. Caleb stood, offered his hand. She took it. They walked back to her room together, past the sleeping children, past the dying father. At her door, he paused. "Tomorrow we'll talk practical," he said. "Land. Papers. What the law needs." She nodded. "Tomorrow." He touched her cheek, once thumb tracing the curve of her jaw, then turned away. She watched him go, the broad line of his shoulders disappearing into shadow. Morning brought brittle sunshine, the first real freeze holding the prairie in crystal silence. Eliza stepped outside to find Caleb already at work, splitting kindling with sharp ringing strokes. The children tumbled out behind her, bundled thick cheeks pink. Samuel ran to help. Ruth trailed after gathering kindling into her apron. Eliza joined Caleb at the woodpile. Their eyes met over the axe. No words passed, but the understanding was there, solid as the frozen ground beneath their boots. That afternoon, a rider appeared on the southern horizon, dust rising behind a single horse. Eliza felt her stomach tighten. Caleb set his tools down, walked to the gate, hand resting easy near the pistol at his belt. The rider was young city, dressed, spectacles fogged from the cold. He dismounted stiffly, pulled a sheaf of papers from his saddlebag. "Mr. Harrow?" he asked. Caleb nodded once. "From the bank in town. Regarding the note on this property. Payments past due." "We've been patient," but Caleb took the papers, scanned them without expression. Eliza stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with him. "How much?" he asked. The young man cleared his throat. $240. Plus interest. Eliza felt the number land like a... She had nothing less than nothing. But Caleb only folded the papers, tucked them into his shirt. "Tell them I'll settle it," he said. "By spring." The rider looked. "They want cash. Or they foreclose." Caleb met his eyes. "They'll get what's owed. But not today." The man hesitated, then mounted up and rode away, dust trailing thin behind him. Eliza turned to Caleb. "You didn't tell me about the debt. Didn't want it hanging over you." He looked out across the pasture, jaw tight. "My father borrowed again when the fever took